So recently, there's been an article released about the idea of SpongeBob spin-offs. And with Nickelodeon bringing back all that, the idea of a SpongeBob spin-off may not be too far-fetched. Despite the show going on for 20 years now, there seems to be an interest in the idea. So while paying tribute to this amazing video structure from these two videos from YouTuber Kento Bento that you should check out after this video, I'm going over the 7 ways Nickelodeon can take this SpongeBob spin-off, including the most realistic, the most creative, the most ridiculous, and the most unexpected. Also plug in my Discord. Before we start, I want to preface each of these by making a few constants. Let's assume that the writing team will be similar, both in skill and view of SpongeBob. Also, let's assume that Nickelodeon will put forth the effort in marketing it, so it has at least a good first season, so the argument of marketing is thrown out the window. Lastly, assume that the characters will stay on SpongeBob unless the idea I have for it goes against that notion. Alright, let's start.
Who lives like a barnacle under the sea?
So the most realistic of the 7 would be Patrick. Why? Firstly, Nickelodeon loves very funny shows that are hyper wacky and possibly full of easy humor. With Patrick, not only do you have the large amount of physical humor that Patrick is associated with, but you have tons of potty humor and a happy-go-lucky character that honestly wouldn't feel out of place in a Nickelodeon show. Obviously, for a character like this, his counterbalance would have to be someone a lot more calm and possibly smarter. I think a big question would be, well, what would Patrick bring to the table that would warrant a show? And that's a good question. Considering at the end of this article, one of the options states SpongeBob and Patrick having an original story, there's a few ways to go about this. I'm not 100% sure on what the third movie will entail, so I'm going to pitch this with no knowledge on how they plan to cover this, or any of the other choices. But if you are to do a just SpongeBob and Patrick story, and you want to make it a spin-off, you cannot just make another episodic show from Patrick's view. The shows would be too similar, and it wouldn't have the legs it needs to stand on its own and make an impact. So possibly tell a story revolving around SpongeBob and Patrick in another setting. Now consider this a stretch, but how about a story about Patrick and his parents? We don't see them along with his sister that he said he didn't have, but then did have, and possibly making the trek back to his original home. And you can take SpongeBob with you, and that can have tons of wacky and fun adventures, but also the emotional draw of Patrick meeting his parents. I wouldn't do this serious at all, up until the end, but you could have the first season be their way through the 7 seas, going through cities, meeting people along the way. Realistically, Patrick brings the most star power to the table, being SpongeBob's best friend, so realistically, I wouldn't mind a Patrick spinoff, considering everything I said in the beginning.
For years, it has been my goal to acquire the secret formula for... But aha! Okay, that's enough!
Next off, we have Plankton. Considering Plankton is the main antagonist of the series, and his large role in the first movie, and his unique episodes, this isn't too far off. The article states that this could be a possibility as well. Now, you'd probably question why essentially a villain has its own show, but mind you, just because Plankton doesn't have the best intentions, doesn't disqualify him from having a good show. Pinky and the Brain, Ed, Edd and Eddy, there have been shows in which their main goal is simply never met, because this is what makes the show. For Plankton, I would think having a show about him taking over the world and failing each and every time due to some clever misstep would be both easy to digest due to being episodic and full of comedy considering the potential of his character. You can also increase the screen time, pun 100% intended, of Karen, his W-I-F-E. I don't have the most positive things to say about her character, but a spinoff could fix a lot of those episodes by episode 1. For this series, it could work well given an idea revolving around Plankton's constant need to take over the world. Now, how would the Chum Bucket play in all of this? Easy enough. That'd be his base of operations. Plankton wouldn't only have to face Krabs, but it wouldn't be off the table either. Although I'd imagine seeing Plankton as the major character most of the time, and Krabs and SpongeBob as secondary characters would be super weird, at least at first. Also, considering Doug Lawrence's amazing job of capturing Plankton's anger, I can already see the funny jokes to come of this.
Who lives in an anchor under the sea?
Eugene Krabs!
Hey, crusty and red and greedy is he? Come back with me, buddy!
Oh, Mr. Krabs. He appeared in the show so much, but there's so little we know about him. Where's his dad? How did his pirate days truly go? Can we expand on friend or foe? What about his relationship with Pearl? Who's the mother? You can already see there's a bunch of different ways Mr. Krabs can be expanded on in his own spinoff. Now, as the joke goes, you would think this would be about chasing money and the pursuit of it. Now, while I wouldn't completely write that facet of his character off, to just have that be the entire idea of the show would be heavily short-sighted on Nickelodeon's part. The Eugene Krabs show has tons of possibility, and with the little that we know about Krabs, the show could be a combination of finding out about his character alongside the pursuit of money. I can see a lot of comedic moments as Mr. Krabs is a funny character, even on his own.
Hey, SpongeBob. Hey, Patrick.
What are you doing with those bags?
I'm going back home to Texas.
What? Now?
Now, let me set the scene up for you for this next one, the most creative one. Our favorite squirrel, Sandy, realizes that she isn't as satisfied working on underwater experiments as she once was. The spark isn't there anymore. But she doesn't want to just immediately leave her friends, so she decides to just take a peek back at the surface world, just for a year, and figure out if she wants that life instead. I think out of all the ideas, this one is the most risky, but also the most creative. Sandy hasn't been the strongest character within the series, despite being the most distinct. She's also had quite a few bad episodes, from Someone's in the Kitchen with Sandy, to Rodeo Days, to her inclusion in Atlantis SquarePants. This all makes her character surprisingly weaker than the rest, which doesn't seem to make sense in concept. Yes, SpongeBob is all about the sea, but Sandy's perspective would be just as interesting. So a spin-off with her would both not affect the original series too much, and also delve into her character and her life in an interesting way. Unlike Krabs, Plankton, and Patrick, however, Sandy is not the funniest character. She's often reacting to others, which is why a new comic relief would need to be made, while the surface world arc is going on. That's probably the weakest point when it comes to all of this, because I don't have that much faith in Nickelodeon, or their team, or their way of viewing everything, when it comes to making a good enough comedic character. But one other idea I wanted to share from this. Seeing Sandy in the surface world would bring up a great question. Would she stay, or would she go? And if you handle it right, a la Final Space, that would be the season finale. If the spin-off does well, she stays. If not, she goes home and the experiment wasn't a waste.
Lives in a monument under the sea.
Squidward tentacle!
Obnoxious, abrasive, conceited is he.
Squidward tentacle!
Now, all these combinations, Squidward's is the one I don't really have too much to say about. While yes, his character is relatable to an older audience, SpongeBob as a whole is not marketed towards an older audience, but a younger audience. Plus, splitting up SpongeBob and Squidward is like splitting up your bread and butter. Now yes, technically according to the rules, he could have a spin-off and be in the show. But then what would the spin-off cover beyond maybe his relationship with Squilliam? Unlike Patrick, he's not funny on his own. Unlike Plankton, his goal of being a famous musician isn't as exciting as taking over the world. Unlike Krabs, his mysterious history isn't as interesting. And unlike Sandy, he doesn't have a drastic change in environment. But let's say they went this way, and they needed an idea. The only idea I think could work for a little while if done right would be to somehow bring him back to Tentacle Acres. At least there, his character deviated enough from his surroundings that he would retain being an interesting character and also have his own theme separated from the main series. Besides that though,
Gary! You are gonna finish your dessert, and you are gonna like it!
Now for the most ridiculous one, that'd be Gary. On paper, it sounds fine. I can understand that, but let's go through the few but large setbacks that this spin-off would have. The biggest one is that Gary doesn't speak. Now yes, we've had cats that only speak through cat noises and done absurdly well, but this doesn't mean that it will always work, if the latest Tom and Jerry reboots haven't told you otherwise. Dialogue for the main character is kind of crucial for a well-rounded character. Now yes, Nickelodeon has tried to get around this, with shows like Rabbids Invasion, but how well do you think that show was received? The second setback would be the way SpongeBob has treated pets and non-sentient animals. Generally, when Gary leads the episode or is the focus, he has other speaking characters to bounce off of. I don't really have too much faith in Nickelodeon to creatively get around those two setbacks alone, but also, Gary, like Squidward, doesn't even have that much of a fleshed out character that would warrant enough interest in the spin-off retaining interest. I even joked back on my Twitter that Sleepy Gary should come back, not Gary, because at least one can speak and has a set personality. In short, the Gary show would just have to wait until Gary warrants a show. Now for the most unexpected of them all, possibly we're thinking within the box too much. How about a new character as a whole. Now by new character, I just mean not in the main or major lineup of characters. So not Larry, not Mrs. Puff or Patchy or others. This new character would have to be handled super well to come across just as entertaining as the main show, have tons of potential to be funny, and also have a strong team of supporting characters that will make the episodes fresh, varied, and worth watching more than once. Of all of these, I consider this to be the most unexpected, because generally spin-offs nowadays are based off of the name value of a character that is related to the show. To have a new character but retain the Bikini Bottom aesthetic, writing style, and quality would be the toughest challenge of them all, but the most rewarding, as it would show a potential in expanding what SpongeBob, yes modern SpongeBob, is capable of. To quote the article, quote, "That's our Marvel Universe," Robin said. "You have this amazing show that's run for almost 20 years. So with this idea, you cement the idea that this underwater show isn't about the sponge, but the characters that revolve around him just as much." So out of these 7 ways, which did you like, or maybe you don't think that SpongeBob should be spun off at all? Let me know in the comments down below, and special thanks to the patrons of February. If you want to support, please check out the links down below, and until next time, take care. Alpha out.